Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 42 of Truth or Trend with Dr. Vrzal and myself, where we tackle all the questions that people bring in and wondering, does this have value for my health or is this just another fad? And today, Dr. V, we haven't talked enough about this. It's something I know that you've got some practice with, and it's something that I have kind of been very aware of, but haven't fully embraced until kind of recently. And this is the application of homeopathy when it comes to healing. And that's something that is hard for people to kind of grasp and wrap their head around. But I've had several experiences that were repeated over and over again with people that has super encouraged me to say, this is something everybody should know about. Everybody should have an awareness of it. And as I'm going into the January purification, I wanted to know where this ties into lymphatics and detoxification. That led me to Dr. Hartsfield. So she's agreed to come on here and have a chat with us about it today. So I'm super happy that we have her brain combined with our brains. We're going to talk a little bit about something we haven't touched on yet. Homeopathy, is this truth or is this woo? Right? That's basically what we're trying to help people understand. So Dr. Hartsfield, welcome. And can you tell us a little bit about yourself before we jump in?
Yeah, thank you so much. Um, I'm Dr. Emily Hartsfield. I graduated from Bastyr University in 2019, um, and mom of three, naturopathic physician. So I'm just really grateful to be here and working. Of course, I work for Energetics. I'm the head of their practitioner support and help with their quality team as well. And yeah, I'm just really grateful to be here and let's dig into some drainage discussion.
Well, but first, for those of you who may not be familiar, Bastyr University, right? I just want to let everybody know that if I would have known about it when I was younger, that's where I would have wanted to go. I got the great pleasure of being able to go up there and do some speaking there. And it's the closest thing to a real life Hogwarts, is what I would say. Because I mean, it was so awesome. They would take you out in the woods and show you wild crafting, and really, it's such a beautiful campus. So, what do you think makes Bastyr so unique, and what made you just choose to get your education there?
Yeah, so for me, Bastyr was one of the few federally accredited medical colleges in the country that I guess helps to produce naturopathic physicians. And so when I was looking to kind of further my education after I graduated with my bachelor's, I always tell people I kind of fell into natural health, but looking back, I guess it was kind of like a process. I went to Aveda, which is for etiology for, to do like skincare and their very natural, approach of Ayurvedic. And then I went back to college and got my bachelor's, and then I just knew that I wasn't done yet. And so when I was looking for somewhere to continue my education, I knew that I wanted something accredited that really had high standards. And then of course, as you said, like looking at the campus, it's gorgeous. The main campus in Seattle, they have two campuses now, but the one that's in Kenmore is situated on St. Edward State Park. And, I would walk through those woods on my lunch break almost every day. There's so many different trails, so kind of choose your adventure for the day, figure out how long I had in my breaks and go for it. And it was, just so beautiful, just being really immersed in that experience. Of course, they're very well known for what they do, and I just knew that that was where I needed to go.
Awesome. Dr. V, didn't you just say that you had an intern from Bastyr? Is that what you were just saying?
I did. Yeah, my most recent interns went there and she's killing it. She was a brilliant practitioner. Yes.
Yeah, sweet. I'm so jealous of
Hmm.
your experience up there. But yes, let's to the thing that everybody's waiting for us to talk about, drainage, right? You can't wait
Drainage.
for drainage. I mean, it's something
Let's
most people they don't think about it, right? When it comes to human. So how do we define it? Why is it so important for helping the body stay balanced, recover naturally? Dr. V, you had something to say about that.
Well, I was just going to throw out the how to muscle test so that as you know, since we have a fair amount of the practitioners that are listening, um, give them the insight so that as Dr. Hartsfield's going through, homeopathics, they have a easy way to get into, how to implement homeopathics. So I use two different reflexes to test for homeopathics. One of them, the first one, was Scott Walker for his whole homeopathic line uses two fingers right, at the bridge of the nose. That typically will mean that there's a need for a homeopathic remedy. So if we have a weak muscle somewhere, then, or a reflex, if that negates it, then that tells us that that person would benefit from a homeopathic remedy. The other way, in the Vrzal technique, those of you that have seen me teach or on the Vrzal technique, and the other way I use it is, I use finger modes to determine structure, chemical, something they're exposed to or something they need, which is the second finger chemical mode, and then emotional. And so for me, for homeopathics, I would use the chemical finger and the emotional finger palm up. In other words, taking away from over a reflex.
You
So
do
that
both
way,
together at the same
it'd
time.
be those two fingers together, because I look at homeopathic, especially for the way I mostly implement it, is kind of a nutrition and an emotional correlation. And so I'll do that over a reflex. If those two fingers together, palm up over, say, the lungs, then I would go to a homeopathic for the lungs, maybe for, lymph drainage for the lungs, kind of a product. So that's kind of a superficial overview of how I might get into it through a muscle testing technique to determine, hey, this person is going to really respond to homeopathics. And so so now let's learn about how we can apply all that
Yeah.
with the expert.
Well, perhaps we should define it first, though. I mean, I had heard somebody make a statement about it, something about like noise canceling headaches, right? It's like a frequency type of thing. And
Mhm.
we just to help people give some context to homeopathy, what could you use some of those analogies that you were helping us understand before?
Yeah, I definitely think using an analogy for homeopathy is definitely the way to go because it can be kind of a complicated, thing to try and explain to people. It is a modality that has been around for over 200 years. Some ways that people describe it are vibrational medicine or, energy frequency, and using those frequencies and kind of harnessing that from different or various substances to help shift the energy, vibration, or frequency of the body. But yeah, using an example is probably the best way. So noise canceling headphones, let's go with that. So the way noise canceling headphones work is they kind of emit a background hum that will match, or similar to the noise that's in the background. And you cannot have two waves of the same size amplitude within the same space. So they're emitting this noise and it's going to match this noise over here and they cancel each other out. So it's kind of the same, again, this is, not a perfect example, of course, but it's a decent enough example that's, for homeopathy where you have a energy frequency here with the homeopathic and it's going to match or meet the energy frequency of the body to help shift it into a more natural healing alignment or to kind of cancel things out. And really, it's just helping to remind the body to do what it already knows how to do, and that's really to heal itself. So it's just kind of this gentle nudge for the body to be like, hey, go and do go and do this. You know how to do it. And so it's really, just something that is kind of, a lower force intervention, if you will, but it's still very effective. Not all low force interventions are ineffective. I mean, it's very effective. Again, it's been around for a really long time. So if it wasn't effective, it wouldn't still be here for sure.
In
So that
homeopathy,
means it's more of a truth than a trend, apparently. It's been around for over 200 years.
yeah, right. Yeah, it's a long trend.
It's a very long trend.
So when it comes to, so it can be applied to so many different things. And today we wanted to talk specifically about drainage. So clearly there's a lot of opportunity and need for people to learn more about that. I do these purification programs, 21 days, where we try to be healthy and we think about opening the drains beforehand, right? And so I'm wondering, is homeopathy something that would be ideal to maybe look at before doing a purification, during or after, or just talk about drainage a little bit and what you think about what does that mean, opening the drains, right?
Yeah, so drainage really refers to a physiologic or cellular process that helps to facilitate not only nutrient deposition, oxygen deposition, the movement of various, immune cells, proteins throughout the body, but also the elimination of waste, whether that's metabolic waste from cellular debris, just kind of naturally occurring waste that the body is going to create, but also like toxins that we're exposed to daily. And so this drainage is really this whole fluid movement pattern that the body uses to deliver nutrients and remove waste. And of course, that's going to encompass the lymph, the liver, kidneys, all that is going to be a part of this drainage process that occurs throughout the body. So it's really this fluid movement pattern that's going into the tissues, into the cells, and then back out again, and kind of bringing all that waste with it.
Awesome. Yeah, I think one way
So
I like to remind people is that as you're clearing out the waste, you don't want to dump more waste into a clogged drain, right? So you want to
Yeah.
make sure that the drains are cleared first. Otherwise, you're going to create more chaos in your life.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So drainage is really helping to open, when we talk about opening drainage pathways, it's really opening those drainage pathways. I think some, more we'll say modern
mhm.
physicians, if you will, doctors, they're like, oh, this isn't, real, or, whatever, lymph, whatever, it's going to do what it's going to do. But if you can get kidney stones, if you can get gallstones, why can't you get blockages in drainage pathways? Why
Mm.
can't your drainage pathways become overburdened to the point where they're not flowing or functioning as they should? And so by supporting that, you're really supporting all body functions.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, and I mean, Dr. V said he had a question this morning from somebody about lymph. I think lymphatic stagnation is a huge issue. And I think a lot of that has to do with our lack of mobility, our lack of, our sedentary lifestyle really does make a bigger burden on the lymph than people realize. And we're
For sure.
trying to make things move, their lymphatic massages, they're, jumping down up and down on trampolines and all these try to shake it out. Because I always remind people too, we have a heart that electrically pumps our blood, but we
Hmm.
don't have a pump to move our lymphatic system, right? We actually have to physically be grinding muscle and bone against it
Hmm.
for it to actually move along. And if we're not doing all of that and opening the drains, this is where there's so many health conditions out there that people are struggling with that they would never consider that that might be the thing that's keeping them from getting well. Dr. V, I heard you chomping at the bit there. You got so many thoughts. I want to hear what you
I
got.
do. I just came up with another one too. So, I mean, just to kind of keep the initial, the kind of the global thing. Yeah, we learned, in school, so to speak, that, moving the lymph pump, doing exercise, all that's going to move the lymphatic system around. But I think especially with homeopathics, kind of the reality is every gland and organ really has its own kind of drainage ultimately, and so that's where homeopathic really shines, right? Is we can direct that drainage to the liver, to the lungs, which I think is a great place to kind of start. Is how are we going to drain all those toxins from me when I ride my bike and I breathe car exhaust? How can I facilitate getting that out of my system? And then the other kind of discussion topic I think would be fun is how do we get, and I have some ideas on this, obviously, but I'd like to hear Dr. Hartsfield's perspective on how do we drain the brain? Because obviously the head, the cranium's not pumping and moving like my legs are when I'm pedaling my bike, right? So
Yeah.
so those would be a couple of kind of fun topics to dive into potentially as well.
You have a thought about that immediately, Dr. Hatzfeld, about brain?
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely exercise is going to be key for so many people. And as you mentioned, Dustin, that so many people aren't even just walking. Like walking is such an easy thing for most people to do, and they're just not, matter of fact, they're just not moving enough,
Mhm.
period. And that, yes, that is going to help pump blood and lymph and things like that as we're moving, but that's still not enough for some people, and that alone could be enough to help get things moving. As your circulatory system is moving, you're going to be moving all that fluid around. Yes, the brain is kind of a unique area. There is a reason why there is a blood-brain barrier to help keep things out that need to be kept out. But, again, movement is going to be number one for most people that, I give recommendations to. That, when practitioners are like, hey, what do you recommend? I'm like, hey, you got, that's like Foundations of Health 101 right there.
Mhm.
Um, Now, a lot of drainage products, especially with homeopathics, they're going to be working systemically, throughout the whole body. Now, of course, there's going to be different ones for different areas. And, we're always going to rely on the practitioners to, like you guys, to make sure that, oh, hey, this is the one that I would recommend for this client or this instance, X, Y, and Z. Within energetics, we make a lot of different products for that reason, so that you guys can kind of customize those protocols. But, within homeopathics, they're really uniquely situated because they aren't met with the same barriers or limits that other drainage products, like, there are drainage products that are botanicals and things like that that practitioners could use. And we have things like that within our line as well. But homeopathics are, because they're not physically acting in the same way that a botanical or other nutritional supplement is, it's going to, again, meet that energy frequency of the body and kind of give it that nudge. And if you're already working within the brain, that's the nervous system, that's energy frequency. That's going to be all those electrical impulses. So it's really going to help that along, probably even more so than anything else you could try.
Wow. Now, I don't want to go totally off because I know we have a structure we want to stick to, but it was as you're talking, the company that she mentioned is Energetics, and that's how I learned about you is through Energetics. And there's so many questions I'm going to bring up with this, but I'm looking at one of the products that I've actually been looking at integrating into these purifications, and it's called Tox Cord, right?
Mhm.
Actually mentions headaches on there, Dr. V. I thought you'd find that very interesting. So, I mean, so how do we, let's bridge that. Let's figure out what is that? Why would headaches be something that would be suggested, when you have Tox Cord? And I know that there's a difference between cords and other things, and I don't know if you can get into that a little bit or not for us a little bit.
Yeah, so I mean, I think, talking about the chords and the tones would probably be a great topic for another discussion. But as far as why headaches are actually a huge thing that people come in as far as complaints wise
Mhm.
when their drainage pathways are overburdened. And a lot of that, again, is going to be lack of fluid movement. I mean, as you mentioned, the brain, is one of those areas that is really kind of a unique area to work with. But there is a lot of fluid movement within the brain. Our entire central nervous system is being flooded with fluid every single day, and so ensuring that we have enough, water, good water, healthy minerals, and drainage is really going to help support that entire process. And when toxins accumulate within the body or within the brain, we're going to have different symptoms that are going to crop up. It's going to cause inflammation. Inflammation is probably within the brain going to cause a headache. And so when you decrease that toxic burden, when you increase that drainage, it's going to help decrease that inflammation, and likely those headaches will clear up. So, yeah, when you have a toxic burden throughout the body, regardless if it's in the brain or, in the liver or whatever, headaches may be a symptom that patients come in with.
We just happen to have the headache expert here with us, Dr. V, who wrote the book on headache. So, Dr. V, can you riff on what she just said a little bit more for everybody? That point home.
Actually, I'm curious. Before we were on camera, you were talking about the correlation of acupuncture meridians with that. I'd like to kind of hear if that drainage tends to parallel those acupuncture meridians, because I know that neurotransmitters are basically a lot of the driving force behind those acupuncture meridians, and most of the meridians kind of go right through, the organs themselves, that sort of stuff. How does that correlate with the homeopathic? How can we implement the two?
Yeah, so I mean, I think you answered kind of your own question right there. So the meridians, as I understand them, I'm sure you're better at explaining this than I am, but the meridians are basically the energy pathways of the body within the
Right.
TCM or traditional Chinese medicine structure framework.
Hmm.
And we do see actually that the lymph system runs parallel to a lot of those, if not all of those meridians.
Right.
And so if you're supporting those energy pathways, you're going to be supporting just inherently the drainage and lymphatic system.
Hmm.
And again, working with the energy frequency, the homeopathics will be great for that. But, in general, I think just supporting, all of those pathways together, um, you'll see a lot of various I
Correlations.
guess, symptoms that are going to clear up within patients. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, nice. So the headache patterns that are mostly based on acupuncture meridians, so like when your product says headaches, for me, that's my first question is always where, what's the location? Right side headache is always, I'm going to say always because it is, anything on the right side of the head is going to be a gallbladder issue. So, we in this world, for the people potentially listening to this, we're going to be looking at liver gallbladder based products, especially gallbladder. Left side headache is going to be a stomach concern. So we look at things to correct that. Uh, Whole head headaches, which is probably related to the product that Dustin just held up. That's going to be a colon concern. Back of the head headaches, traditionally called tension headaches, is going to be a thyroid, typically hypothyroid consideration, and its relationship with enzyme production. Then we've got what I call the cyclops headache right in the center of the head. That's a pituitary concern. Then we've got the frontal headache, is typically going to be high cortisol and kind of think of a ulcer type of a pattern. That's the frontal headache. And there's one more, right? What did I miss? Whole head. I think that's all of them.
Look out. Yeah, I'll take a look here.
There's a book about that somewhere, huh?
I think you got him. I think you got him. Yeah, for the most part. Left side, right side.
Bitemporal headaches, like
For the
my
temple.
headphones.
There you go.
Bitemporal headaches is estrogen metabolism.
There you go.
So that would be your headache patterns for those interested.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
Oh yeah, that's why that's why we're doing this. That's one of the reasons we do this podcast is for that reason exactly. So, but yeah, you're talking about colon and that being the whole head, right? That has to do with if the drains aren't open and the colon can get backed up, then even worse. So let's talk a little bit real quickly about the difference between drainage and detox, right? They're not exactly the same thing. So can you talk about that?
They're definitely not the same thing, and I think a lot of people don't even, as we mentioned, they don't even think about drainage. But everybody talks about detox. And what detox really is, it's this transformation process that the body carries out to kind of neutralize or transform or get rid of these toxins that accumulate in the body. And, obviously we're really seeing this through the liver, the phase 1 and phase 2 liver detox pathways. And then everything is carried out in what we call kind of phase 3 through the GI tract. But it's really this mechanical and energetic movement of waste through, the liver. It's, all those toxins being fully eliminated. So drainage, though, is this other piece, and they're really connected. You can't really have one without the other. You can't effectively detox if you're not draining effectively. Otherwise, again, we mentioned if you're not draining the toxins, and again, whether this is a naturally occurring toxin or something else that you've been exposed to, don't have anywhere to go. They're going to accumulate within the tissues. They're not even going to make it to the liver. And so, drainage is really that piece that gets all those toxins to the liver to begin with to be detoxed.
So would it be wise to do a lymphatic movement after doing a liver detox or before, right? What would be the most wise timing for something like that?
Yeah, so if we were looking at supporting drainage pathways, a lot of times I'll say before, during, and after. Why do you have to choose just one? Because again, we want to, I think you mentioned this in the beginning, prime that pump. Let's make sure everything is open before we start trying to detox anyway. Because again, if those drainage pathways aren't open, whatever it is you're looking to detox isn't going to have anywhere to go. So let's get those drainage pathways open. And then as you're detoxing, you're probably going to still need that support. And then after, we want to keep those drainage pathways open. So there might be, many people who need kind of continual support. And it might not be like, oh, they're just on this long-term, whatever protocol. But, they may need some drainage check-in, we'll say. Dr. Vrzal, I think you mentioned that, with your muscle testing, I'm sure you're seeing this pop up in patients, from time to time, regardless of what they're detoxing or, maybe you're supporting, hormones and then they need some drainage support. So, this isn't just during detox that we would see this come up.
When it sounds like homeopathic, and they do, but I mean, to kind of open the discussion, it sounds like they're going to work well with nutrition as well, because a lot of people that listen to this are using clinical nutrition, supplements, but it sounds like the homeopathics are going to actually help those supplements work even better, ultimately, correct? Mhm.
Yeah, they really do work really cohesively with everything else that you could be doing with patients. And again, whether you're doing a homeopathic drainage support or, again, we have botanicals that work with drainage pathways and, other nutritional supplements may help there as well that we have in our line. Whatever it is that you're doing, they all are really synergistic together. And I really do feel like it's a part of that piece that you might be implementing with your patients. If you're looking at a protocol or building a protocol, there's always like, kind of one piece that's the foundational piece. Then you kind of have your targeted, we'll say treatment, whatever that is. And then, you have this other piece over here that's more of like your energy support. And by that I mean, is it acupuncture, is it homeopathy, and so as you're building out this protocol, it might be one of those kind of bubbles, if you will.
But you
Nice.
mentioned earlier that people really talk a lot about detox, right? And they don't talk about drainage. And I think we're aware that there's so many things that, yes, we need to get toxins out, and that's what people are thinking about. But what would be some early signs that might suggest that it's the body's drainage systems that actually need the extra support as opposed to just detoxifying?
Yeah, yeah, I actually like your point before I answer your question. I actually really like that point that so many people get really hyper focused on detox and yes, I think at some point we all need support there for various reasons, whatever that is. But I do think that it's not like the end all be all for everybody and every time and everything. And so some early, I guess, indicators, we already mentioned headaches. That's a huge one. Fatigue, I think, is probably the number one complaint that, and I'm sure you guys can agree that people come in with. They're like, I'm just tired all the time. I just have this brain fog. I feel like I hear that from, everybody that I know. And I know I've certainly been in that spot myself personally. Some other things you might see are different skin conditions, acne, eczema, psoriasis. Of course, those are like, I guess probably the big main three there. But also constipation issues with patients, but also kind of the opposite. Maybe they're having a lot of diarrhea. There's, kind of in this IBS picture where they're just, never really feel great. So, and then I think one of the biggest, I guess most easily recognizable ones is just lymphatic tenderness. I was having this the other day when, there's been a cold kind of going through the house. And you're like, oh, my lymph nodes are just swollen.
Hmm.
I think again, at some point we've all probably experienced that to some degree. And, drainage. Drainage is really great. I mean, if you're going to be talking about the lymphatic system, you got to support that drainage pathway.
So, how do you now not to get too deep into this, but what I also love is that when we were talking about this before, we yes, tones and chords are two separate things in homeopathy, and maybe not for today's discussion, but you have lymph tones one, two, and three. And so I want to dig deeper into this concept of like there are, and I say it like this when we're doing this purification, right? You could, if you have a dirty house and you hire somebody to come in one day and clean it, that will help a little bit. But if you don't have anybody messing the house up for 21 days, you can really get a deep clean, right? And
Hmm.
can we talk about these three deep levels, right? What are the three levels of this lymphatic tone, perspective?
Yeah. So when we talk about, I guess we'll say drainage in general, or even just, even beyond drainage, there are various levels that one may experience as we're kind of going through life, as we progress through different, we'll say, dis-ease, and I don't mean disease as in diagnosable of, but dis-ease before we ever really realize that we're sick. And so the lymph tones one, two, and three are uniquely made to, as I guess, representing these stages. So one stage is going to be more acute conditions. I say everyday body functions. We might be talking about an acute cold or, other illness. You know, also acute exposure or recent exposure to some sort of toxin. So if you're like, hey, 3 weeks ago, I remember that I was in this house that had all these Glade plugins in the wall and I've had a headache ever since, and I just haven't felt better, maybe you need some drainage support, but that's very acute. And then you have the second stage, which is going to be getting more chronic conditions. I also put like what I call silent chronic symptoms in this, where things are getting potentially worse even though you don't realize it. So in this first stage, we're very extracellular. We're in this, extracellular matrix within the tissues. This is that drainage space, okay? This is kind of like the first space that these drainage fluids, and really what I mean by that is, lymph and serum and plasma that come out of the vasculature to deliver nutrients. And so they first are going to be in this extracellular space within the tissues. But then it gets into this other space that's getting deeper within the tissues and into the cell. And this is going to be the second stage where things are becoming more chronic, even if we don't realize it. And we'll kind of see this progressive worsening of symptoms. You might have more chronic migraines. You might have more chronic allergies. I always use varicose veins as an example. Even obesity, especially obesity or patients that have trouble losing weight despite kind of doing all the things right. And yes, I know everybody, a lot of patients aren't always fully honest, especially in the beginning, but, if they really are truly doing everything right, if they're, eating right, moving their body, all this other stuff, but they just cannot lose weight, that might be a sign here too. So kind of these silent chronic symptoms where, these are things that people are dealing with ongoing, and may brush off as normal, but they're really not.
Mm, mm.
And then our third stage is all the way within the cell, maybe within the nuclear space where the DNA is housed. Here we're starting to see true cellular involvement, or issues within the cell itself. And these are going to be patients that know they're sick. They're going to come in with some sort of, diagnosable condition. So these stages, of, I guess, progressive worsening can be a great, I guess, indicator for practitioners on like how bad things have gotten, how deep within that, within the body do we need to be working. And so the lymph tones are kind of uniquely positioned for addressing each one of these stages.
Wow. That
And
gives,
then what they're going to do is they're going to help drain at that deeper level so that patients can then kind of, we'll say, regress and get better.
and I think when I first
Hopefully,
asked you,
thankfully.
I asked, is there a way that the body takes care of this, right? Does the body want to get rid of the first level first to get to the second level and then get deeper into it? But I think maybe I remembered it wrong, but the body's trying to probably do all three at once. And it just depends on where it really needs the greatest support at that time. Is that
Mhm.
okay?
Yeah, exactly. So I think the ideal approach is meeting the patient where they're at. Which one do they need? I think that this is a great spot for any practitioner to be in. It's just like, I don't have to like it's do this big thing to get them to this spot that I want them to be in. It's like, where are they at? You meet the patient where they're at always, in my opinion. And so, again, as far as drainage is concerned, you do what you need to do in that moment. And then, you know, when the patient is hopefully better, you move on from that and then address it again. So kind of reevaluate.
Dr. V, do you have anything I've been keeping?
Well, we're talking homeopathics, and one of the first questions people often say is, "What's this 10x, 200x thing?" Maybe if you could give us a 30,000 foot view of how the different potencies affect people, or why there would be different potencies on the label, say, of a product.
Yeah, so again, probably a better question answered on another day. Um, you know, what I could say is that those potencies, uh, do I want to answer that? Um, yeah, I think we'll leave that question just because like I don't know if they would want me getting into those details, honestly.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Just so,
So
Dr. V,
does
how do you
that
explain it?
affects the energy? Oh, I mean, as I understand it, it's reduced 10 times, or it's reduced 200 times. Does that give a bigger energy, a bigger vibrational spin, so to speak, when it's more reduced? or, how does, again, just a very superficial kind of answer to a patient that might ask that.
Yeah, so it does have to do with the dilution factor, but I really
Mhm.
don't want to get into like the spin of things because I do think that that gets kind of confusing as far as trying to explain it in a way that people would understand.
Yeah. In your case, they'd probably muscle test for one or the other, Dr. V, just to
Of
see.
Yeah.
course. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would say that, in the homeopathic products that we make, there are different potencies in them. And,
Right.
if you're doing muscle testing, then your patient might, test for one over the other just based on, what they would need.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay.
The other
I guess
part,
I was just looking for a simple answer. A 10x is more going to be acute, 200x, more chronic, but nothing that simple that can be thrown out to our group, huh?
that's all right. Not yeah, I don't know if she's yeah, that's all right. Hey, you talked about Dr. V, you use both the chemical and the emotional piece, and I don't think we've talked about emotions enough when it comes to homeopathy. It's
Right.
in your experience, is there an emotion that you would see happening in somebody who has like stagnant lymph, right? Who doesn't have their drains open? What emotionally are you going to see in somebody who has that need for help to move that along?
So each organ has its own emotional complex to it.
Okay.
So it's going to depend, if we're trying to clear the lungs, then could be after loss of a loved one is a great example, right? Lungs, grief, sadness, yearning, crying, all the type of stuff that we're going to go through, after losing somebody we care about, or even a pet or, any of that sort of situation. So then it could help smooth. I mean, I have a homeopathic we use for lung function that is kind of what I give to everybody at a memorial,
Oh, wow.
or that sort of thing. So that would be and then adrenals is muddled instability, frightfully overjoyed, paranoid. So it kind of, if as Dr. Emily was talking about, going through the consultation, those are going to be questions she's probably asking, or we'd want to know, hey, ever since you know mom died, I've had a cough, or and then, I mean, we can even get into the time frames because organs have their 2 hour windows. So, if the lung is predominantly active between 3 and 5 in the morning. So if a person wakes up coughing or their sleep is restless between 3 and 5 in the morning, there's another indication. And, potentially we're going to be looking at emotional triggers, homeopathics, for that window of time as well.
Sweet. Good answer. Nice.
Mhm.
So I know that we're running a little bit close on time. So to kind of bring it back to the drainage and detox, let's talk a little bit about how people who are listening can begin to support their natural drainage and detox processes in a simple, everyday way, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead, doctor.
So I think, as we mentioned, I think one of the biggest ones is people, get up, move your body. If you have to start at a 5-minute walk at a time, then that's where you got to start. But we need to be moving more. We need to be drinking more water. I think one of the biggest things, and I'm sure you guys can attest to this, is that just patients are almost always chronically dehydrated. Fluid in, fluid out. And it's going to help flush our systems. Of course, we want good water, mineralized water that, is healthy for us. It's going to be kind of be giving us something back. So that's going to be really important. Of course, healthy diet is also going to be really important just to make sure that we have the nutrients that we need for our body to function, optimally. I think those are probably the biggest ones patients can do. I also love like a good like Epsom salt bath. You can do some like cold water, plunges, in between there, sauna, all that kind of stuff is going to be helpful. But I think movement is probably one of the biggest ones. And then from there, go to your practitioner and, hopefully they're using energetics and they can help support your drainage pathways.
What about some herbals? I remember when I was at Bastyr, they were growing burdock out there.
Mhm.
Had a lot to say about that. Is Dr. V, is that one you think about for lymphatic drainage at all? Any herbs specifically? I would think of burdock root, but what about you, Dr. Hartsfield?
Yeah, I love burdock. I know black radish is another one that a lot of practitioners use. Oh gosh, another one like poke root is another great lymphagogue. We have that in some of our botanicals. We have actually like a kit. I know you've talked about your January reset. We have our opening channels program. And it's kind of a kit put together. It's different nutritional products, and then it has our rehydration, which is another homeopathic to help with fluid movements. It's technically in our drainage category. And so the one of the products in there, the Pure Body Clear, is a combination of various herbs. It's an encapsulated herbal for just general emunctory support. So kidney, GI tract, liver, gallbladder, your emunctories are your organs of elimination. So, it's going to help a little bit with lymph and drainage as well there. So that's a great, step to take. Some patients and practitioners really like going through that too. So there's lots of different herbs that practitioners can use, and that's just a handful of them off the top of my head.
Great. I mean, you mentioned poke root. That's Dr. V. Have you ever used poke root?
I'm curious. I have
Something to be
not.
careful with, I would say, for sure. Yeah, that's
That
an
one's a deep lymphagogue. So,
okay.
yeah.
Oh, okay. So what do you mean by deep lymphagogue? What is that? Can you translate
So
that?
I just feel like, you have some lymph support or drainage support that isn't quite as stimulating. I always feel like the way I was taught about poke, it was a little bit more of like a stimulating, it's just going to drive lymph and drainage a little bit more effectively, or
Yeah,
it's just a stronger one, stronger acting.
a very little bit goes a very long way.
Yeah. Yeah,
Say
you don't need much.
that one. And I think Dr. V, from a standard process standpoint, Thymex is one that I often bring into the picture to help get the lymph moving. What are ones
Mhm.
you're thinking about for lymphatics that you would?
Exercise.
Yeah, of course. Of course, of course.
Yeah, but I mean, we want to look at minerals too, right? Because that's our energy. We talked about fatigue and that stuff. The minerals are going to drive the energy channels
Hmm.
ultimately. I mean, think of your battery. The cars. A lot of cars are electric, right? But that's an ion transfer between two minerals. So I mean, those are going to drive a lot of these pathways that we're talking about. So don't forget, as practitioners, as you're testing through to try to figure out where the deficiency is. And I always say, my favorite tagline is organics cheaper than chemo.
Right.
So
Hmm.
getting those minerals are going to drive those pathways. They're going to not leave binding sites open for these toxic metals to bind up and congest and compromise our drainage pathways. So keep your organic vegetables up to keep your mineral content, use your electrolytes with your water and so on. Uh, as you mentioned, Dr. Hartsfield as well. I mean, all that it all plays together, and I mean, with this podcast, it keep coming back to that, right? Get the organic vegetables, get your activity, stay hydrated. And all of that plays in. Those are all anti-aging protocols, right? To help us age
Hmm.
gracefully and age well, so that we can continue to thrive when the grandkids are running around playing baseball.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love our spectrumin that we have. It's a great mineral trace mineral drop. And that's one thing that I recommend it for all the time on, supporting not only just general health and well-being, but, longevity. And as you mentioned, all of our cells are on an energy gradient. They all require minerals in order to function. So you definitely need that. And as you mentioned, that's key too to drainage, to healthy drainage. So
So we're coming up on last thoughts here. Dr. V, any last questions for Dr. Hartsfield? What we got here as a captive audience around any of this?
It's been enlightening. I think I'm going to refer patients to this when they have questions about homeopathic, right? We
Mhm.
have a resource now to say, hey, go listen to this truth or trend.
Yeah.
It's been great having you. Thank you for clarifying some insights and helping us be better practitioners.
Yeah. And
absolutely.
I appreciate you bringing the attention back to the drainage. I think that's an important thing because we do have so many people doing, especially coming up in January, detoxification programs, but we have to remind them that the importance of the drainage aspect has to be there as well for them to fully get to the real value of what they're doing.
Absolutely. Yeah. As I mentioned, they all work together. You
Mhm,
can't
mhm.
really have one without the other. And so it's a really integral piece for a lot of, patients that they may not even realize that they're missing.
Absolutely. Any last thoughts for everybody, Dr. Hartsfield? Thank you so much, by the way, for being here.
Yeah, I always just like to, throw out there that, whatever it is that you're looking to achieve, as you mentioned, I know so many, I'm not a huge New Year's resolution type of person, full disclosure, but I know a lot of people are, and they use, January as an opportunity to kind of like jump on board. And, I love a good, I do a few cleanses a year, truthfully. And so, I know a lot of people like using January as that. And so just remember that anything that you're doing, anything that you're implementing, it's like better over time. So just stick with it,
Mm,
and just remember you don't have to like do this huge big overhaul that, even just small steps at a time can make a huge difference.
awesome. Perfectly said. Cool. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Emily. Hopefully, we can bring you back another time to get into some other deeper questions
Yeah,
that.
absolutely. I would love that.
Mhm.
Sweet. Well, everybody, thank you for watching. I hope you found this enlightening as we did, and we will hopefully hear or see you in the next episode.
Mhm.
Take care.